My story began 30 years ago when a 19-year-old boy trudged through sewage water in search for a new life with good opportunities. Day and night, he fought extreme conditions to finish his journey from Mexico to America. 2 months later, he made it. Today, I call that boy Papa. I am the child of immigrants. Many times when I say that, I see how people's expression changes. They become uncomfortable. Growing up, I learned that many people in the United States are immigrants or the descendants of immigrants. But dominant narratives within the United States have constructed immigrants as separate from the idea of American. Illegals, go home. These aren't people, these are animals. Build the wall. These newspaper headlines, tweets from politicians, and comments from the White House reinforce the idea that immigrants are not American. The words used animal, criminal, illegal suggest that immigrants are not even human. The sources that these stories tell do not align with my own. When I see my dad, I don't see a criminal or an animal. I see the most loving and giving person who has only worked his entire life to give me the best possible opportunities. Growing up, my parents constantly reminded me to be grateful for the opportunities that I have been given, that I am lucky to be receiving a college education and pursuing a career, that I'm more privileged than the others who do not have these opportunities. However, as I establish my place among those who are privileged, I often forget my past and my family's history. Growing up, I felt embarrassed to bring friends home because our food was different, my parents spoke funny, and I thought it was weird how we had a shrine to Our Lady of Guadalupe on the wall. I developed an aversion to my own culture because of the stigma surrounding immigration. You see, when Americans realize that immigration is not completely separate from us or from them, they become uncomfortable. But I realized I needed to become uncomfortable too. I am the child of immigrants. Why have I been conditioned to believe that that is bad?
I am a good person. That's what my family and friends told me when I returned from El Paso, Texas last year, working at Annunciation House. One volunteer described it as a travel agency / bed and breakfast for migrants who had recently been released from U.S. detention centers. Upon their release, they were cold. Temperatures in El Paso frequently dipped below freezing during the wintertime. Migrants described the centers as las hileras, ice boxes. They were hungry, as they often only received 1 or 2 frozen burritos a day to eat. But mostly, they were tired, as they had spent weeks or months journeying from Mexico or Central America by train, by bus, by foot, or any combination of the 3. When they entered, we greeted weary eyes and tired gates with colorful signs reading "Bienvenidos," welcome. We are not a part of the government, we said. We are here to help you travel, to give you food, and to find you clothing. Most of the work I did in the center was menial. I poured soup into the dishes of families as they sat in silence. I cleaned bathrooms, I cleaned floors, and I cleaned dishes. I talked on the phone with family members and using my intermediate Spanish, confirming bus reservation numbers. I distributed toiletries. One group of young boys repeatedly came up to the toiletry table asking for oil for their mother's hair. They would come back a couple minutes later with mohawks, giggling, and asking for more. One woman, Daniela, approached me and asked if she could have help getting her skinny jeans off. She couldn't get them around the tracker on her ankle that the government put on to track her location. When we had to tear off her jeans, she cried. "Those were my favorite pants," she said. I passed a soccer ball with one young boy, David. He told me about how he was going to see his dad in New Jersey after not seeing each other for 5 years. I asked him about his journey from Guatemala. "I was just really hungry," he said. He told me about how in the detention center he would rip the tortilla off the frozen burrito and leave the icy clumps to melt. But I want to let you know, I didn't cry, he said. I didn't cry the whole time. I walked one father, Miguel, over to the clothing closet in order to find some more weather-appropriate clothing. He gestured towards his dirty jeans. I just want a new pair of pants, he said. After crossing the Rio Grande, his pants had frozen to his legs. Several days later, they thawed. He looked at me with teary eyes and he told me, I can't wear these anymore. Another woman, Fernanda, approached me and told me she needed help. I rushed her into the office and I pulled out resources for immigration lawyers and her paperwork. She shook her head. I need something to disinfect my shoes. She told me about how, after walking the majority of the way from Honduras and crossing through the river, her shoes had begun to smell. And immigration didn't feel so abstract anymore. Immigration wears down the soles of your shoes and smells kind of like high school gym class. The feeling of being separated in detention center is reminiscent of the feeling of losing your parents at the grocery store when you were younger. It's losing your family, your favorite pair of pants, and maybe a piece of yourself too. I recognize it's none of these things really. The hardships migrants undergo are far beyond the scope of my own experiences. But when I remember these shared feelings of disorientation, of loss, and of pain, immigration doesn't feel so separate from myself. I understood the United States as comprised of citizens and immigrants, legals and illegals, good people and bad people. But when I allow the sights and sounds and feelings of another person to become more familiar to my own, these dualities fall apart. We're no longer separate. What has been portrayed as a national security crisis begins to feel more like heartbreak. And America begins to look more like a broken promise. Why are immigrant and human mutually exclusive?
In choosing to remember, I interned at a legal aid clinic that primarily served the Latinx population in applying for citizenship and DACA renewals. I worked along a woman named Cindy. One of the first people that Cindy introduced me to was a woman named Jimena. Jimena is a young woman in her 20s, who came to the United States only 2 weeks after her 16th birthday. Unfortunately, in order to qualify for DACA, one needs to be under the age of 16 at the time of arrival in the United States. It was because of these 2 weeks that Jimena was rejected from DACA. As a child, Jimena faced extreme poverty, hunger, and domestic abuse in Mexico. It was for all these reasons that she had chosen to move to the United States along with her mother and her sister. By having a 30-minute conversation with her, I learned that her favorite food was deep dish pizza, she loved to play soccer, and she had a younger sister with Down syndrome, who inspired her to want to become a special needs aide. However, that dream will just stay a dream, she said. She explained how she didn't have the money to pay for school, and without a citizenship status, she couldn't apply for financial aid. All of her dreams were subject to a piece of paper. Jimena's story is one like many others. My cousin Diana and I were born 11 days apart. We grew up attending the same family parties, playing with American Girl dolls, and obsessing over the Jonas Brothers. We grew up having the same hopes and dreams, but there's one difference that has affected our lives drastically. I was born in the United States, while she was born in Mexico and carried to the US in her mother's arms at only 3 months old. Now, this didn't make a difference in our upbringing and personalities. I actually didn't even know this until we were both applying to colleges. Diana's dream is to become a doctor. She's an honor student, an athlete, and one of the most loving people I know. But without a citizenship status, she can't afford school because she can't get the financial aid that she needs. In the meantime, I'm about to finish my 3rd year of college and thinking about law school, while she's waiting tables in an attempt to save enough money for junior college. We grew up having the same hopes and dreams. Why will our lives be drastically different just because of a piece of paper?
Upon leaving the center, most families only requested one thing: don't forget about us. After several weeks in El Paso, I returned to school. The soup we ate was gone. Most of the migrants were too. At the southern border, the majority of immigrants are turned away. Upon entry, the majority of asylum seekers are sent to Mexico or back to their countries of origin. If I were to live my life day to day, I could forget about the people I met in El Paso. I could exist under the false pretense that immigration is a crisis, large, abstract, and separate from myself. Privilege affords me this choice. But my humanity, the part of me whose brokenness is attached to the brokenness of another, compels me to remember. I used to subscribe to the idea that in this world there are citizens and immigrants, legals and illegals, good people and bad people. But I've since realized that the powerful construct these designations in order to justify the separation between us, in order to forget, if only for a moment, that even the powerful are human. It's not my job to say who is right and who is wrong, but I have an obligation to invite the protected, the mighty, and the powerful to vulnerability. I warn, vulnerability breaks hearts. Deconstructing barriers hurts. It forces you to look at people on the margins, to people who have traditionally been identified as the other, and to see pieces of yourself. To recognize that we are not that separate. You too have hungered. You have suffered. And maybe you've lost a favorite pair of your pants. If we have the power in our stories to dehumanize people coming to the border, coming to the United States, then in changing these stories, we must have the power to rehumanize them too. A year after I spent time in El Paso, I returned to the border at Tijuana. Every Sunday, a priest comes and celebrates a binational interfaith worship with people on both sides. The priest speaks through the fence. The songs rise above it. And at the end of the service, he asks everyone on both sides to look up to our shared sky. Birds fly above the wall, and fish swim through the slats in the fence that reaches into the ocean. Migration is and always has been an integral part of the human experience. As much as politicians, the popular media, and a construction of a wall try and convince me that there is a border between me and those who face suffering, this is a weak and fruitless attempt. Because when I look up at our shared sky, I am reminded of the earth's indifference to these constructed divisions. So we must write a new story. I will remember their humanity.
And I will remember my own.
I refuse to forget.